Welcome to the Path Forward podcast. I'm your host, Augie Ghilarducci. The podcast is brought to you by U-Turn Health and Second Opportunity. And just by way of introduction, what I try to do with these podcasts is to interview individuals that have gone through incarceration and have gone through reentry and have gone through those struggles and challenges so they can share their story and some of what they've learned and some of what may be helpful to those on the inside who are going through incarceration right now. We also provide this to people that have been incarcerated and maybe struggling to get some traction to move forward. And it's good for them to hear stories of hope and inspiration. And we are available through traditional podcast channels so that family members of people that are incarcerated can listen to what some of the challenges are to help them better prepare to be able to deal with their loved one when they release. So with that having been said, I have the privilege today of having Caleb Harris on as our guest. He's a really terrific guy, and he's got a very gripping story. And that's why I'm so thrilled. So Caleb, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. I wanted to start by talking about, kind of your background and where you grew up and went to school, and if you played sports and what you were like as a younger person.
Yeah, so I was born in Dothan, Alabama, which is about 30 minutes from the Florida line and about 45 minutes north of Panama City Beach. And I grew up with a pretty good family. My grandparents worked for the state. When I was in the third grade, my mother and I have an older brother, we moved up to Maryland. And my father and my mother had gotten divorced when I was about 3. My father was a career military man. My mother suffered with mental health and drug addiction. And so as a child, I had suffered a lot of different traumas. And I played sports, but not regularly.
And then at some point, were you living in Florida as an adult?
Yeah, so when I was about 13 or 14, I was afforded the opportunity to go to a military school in Virginia. But by then, through all the traumas and experiences I had suffered as a growing up, I ended up getting kicked out of there when I was about 14. And by that time, my mother had moved back to Florida. And so I started the 9th grade down in Cottondale, Florida.
After you went through, did you go all the way through high school?
I did. I made it to my senior year and was expelled. But I had the wherewithal to go ahead and get my GED. So I completed that, got my GED.
And then at some point after that, things went wrong and you ended up in some trouble. Is that how the story went?
Yeah, so I had my first child when I was 18. About the same time, me and my mother used drugs together. And by that time, I had already been using substances to cope with all of the trauma and the feelings that I had inside of me. I had no other outlet. And so around the age of 23, I was incarcerated for my first time in Florida.
And how long did that last?
I got an 18-month sentence and ended up doing about 16.
At some point, you moved to Wyoming, correct?
I did. So my mother had passed away from a drug overdose right before I was sentenced to that 18-month sentence. And, she passed away, and then my grandmother had passed away in 2006. And then shortly after, about a month or two after she passed away, I got my sentence. And while I was in there, my grandfather had passed away. In Florida, it's like the federal system. You get sentenced in months, and there's no parole. So when I was released, I didn't have any parole or anything. And so I just tried to do the best that I could. And by this time, I had my second child. And I just knew that it wasn't going to work out for me. And while I was incarcerated, I was doing some whole time. And there was a guy next to me, and he was telling me about his father had helped him get these industrial jobs. And he had given me a website, and we were talking, how they do through the vents. And he gave me this website where I could find some work. And in my mind, I'm like, well, if I can make a lot of money, my life will change. When I got out, I knew that if I didn't make some changes, I was going back to prison. And so I got on that website, and I just had, this was around the wind energy was picking up. I found a job here in Casper, Wyoming, building windmills. So I just called up here and kind of told the guy my story. And he said, well, if you drive out here, he said, I'll give you a job doing something. So I left and drove all the way out here and started my journey.
And how did that job go when you got up there?
It went well. I've always had this, I have to do it on my own, and this survival mentality. And so when the job had ended, I kind of had been going back and forth to Florida. And while I was doing all that, I was arrested again here in Casper in 2011 for possession and delivery of marijuana.
And did that result in incarceration?
Yes, I got a 4 to 6 year sentence for that.
How much time did you do on that, 4 to 6?
Well, I ended up getting out on parole 2 different times. The first time I made it about 10 months. Well, actually I did a year at a halfway house. And then once I was released from that halfway house, I did 10 months and was revoked. And this just goes to the barriers that I've been afforded a lot of opportunities, but I had so much trauma and so many cognitive barriers that I had no idea that I even had. And so after my 10 months in my revocation, I went back on about a 6-month turnaround. And when I was released, I think I had 10 months left of parole left. And I had 15. By this time, I had never really messed with meth and things like that. I got really into that stuff. I mean, injecting drugs really just turned me into somebody that I never thought I was. And so I had 15 days to kill that 4 to 6 year sentence. And I went in for my last check-in for parole and had planned on going back to Florida that day. And I was arrested again. And they went to my apartment, and I was charged with 6 new felonies, which resulted in another 4 to 6 year sentence.
And so when did the incarceration, when did you finish up your sentences?
So I think one of the most important parts of my story is that when I got arrested that last time, I was in the jail and I started seeing myself from outside. Like I could see myself talking to these men in the pod, and something inside of me was telling me, that's not you. Now, I didn't grow up in a church. I always felt like I had something different inside of me. And while I was there, when I started seeing that, some guys had asked me to come to a Bible study. And so I ended up going to this Bible study, and they were telling me about Jesus and that he had died for my sins. I believed it. And so I went from being in my holding cell, wanting to die, just wanting to commit suicide, to where I got on my knees and I prayed to Jesus. And I believed in my heart that he died for all of my sins. And so something happened to me then. And I felt this, went from crisis to just the calmest feeling. And I felt something from my head to my feet. And I just heard that you're forgiven. And so when that happened, everything changed for me. And so I completed my sentence in December, I think it was December 20th of 2020. I had completed my parole, and I've been off parole ever since.
Wow, there's a lot there. So let me ask, while you were actually incarcerated doing your time, are there any things that you were doing that you can point to say help prepare you for reentry?
Yeah, I started any and everything that I could do to get better mentally, spiritually, and physically. I began doing those things. The things I had done in my past, I always fell into the group incarcerated, the cool guys, there were all these, oh, well, if your case looks like this, then you can't hang out with us. And this time it wasn't like that. I didn't care. I I knew that something inside of me was going to help me get better. And so I focused on that, and I started being kind, and I started being loving, and I started helping others. And in turn, it began helping me.
I got to tell you, I really like that. Sometimes just being kind to others, we end up being the one that benefits, right? I mean, the way that we feel about ourselves, especially while we're incarcerated. I like to think that if you talk to some of the guys that I was away with that knew me, they would say that I'd be willing to help almost anybody, but at the end of it, I was the one that felt good. And so the bit that we know each other, that same mentality of kindness and caring for others has followed you to the outside. Is that not correct?
It is because of I know what I have done. I know what the things that are in my past, the wreckage of my past, and God forgave me for that. And for me to live a life trying to hold others accountable for what I think that they are was a huge barrier in my life, and it kept me from growing.
So what are you doing now? I mean, as you're out there, and I know you're making impact in a number of areas, but please share with us what you're doing now as you're out and still new on this reentry journey, still challenges ahead, like all of us. But would you mind sharing with us some of that?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to go back to when I was up until I was released to the halfway house in 2019. I was released October 25th of 2019, and I had to go to the Casper Reentry Center, which is a 6-month program. Up until this point, I had never really had been able to hold down a job. I didn't have skills. I'd never had my own place. I had never got a car loan. Um, while I was incarcerated, this was a huge point too. I felt that God would speak to me, and so I was able to get out 10 months earlier than that. But before there was an opportunity arose for me to do a welding program. And so I was laying in my rack one night, and I just felt something inside of me saying, you have to stay in prison and do this program because you have no skills. So I decided to stay 10 extra months in prison to do this welding program. And so I completed this program, got certified. And once I got to the reentry center, I got a welding job, uh, welded for about a year, did really well, got my first apartment, got bills in my name, finally got a car loan, took another job in sales, and things got pretty well for me. I was making figures, and goes back to I thought money would fix things. And so I had all the money. I had a brand new truck. I had a 2-bedroom house. I was single. But I just wasn't happy. And so I'm like, oh, well, I'll go back to Florida and try to fix this relationship, thinking that would fix me. And it didn't. And so I started coping the ways that I've always coped. And I got on prescription medications and really began to lose myself. And in November of 2021, I had another spiritual awakening, and I really felt God speaking to me, and He told me to walk away from everything and follow Him. And so I walked away from everything. I let everything go in repossession. All my credit cards went to debt, uh, and I became homeless. And I went to the Wyoming Rescue Mission here in Casper, Wyoming, and they have a discipleship program. And so I did 13 months in the discipleship program, and I felt like He had downloaded all of these things to me. And it was reentry, go back into the jails and prisons, and help these men and women. be the person that you needed to be when you were in there. And so towards the end of my discipleship program, I was awarded a scholarship through City Vision University, which is a Christian university, and I've been going after my bachelor's in Christian ministry and leadership. May of last year, a group of us got together and we formed Thrive Together initiative. So for the last year or so, I've been volunteering all my time. We began 2 support groups in the jail on Wednesday and Saturday night. And they also started at the time it was 30 days. Now it's a 45-day treatment unit inside the jail. So this year they'll do 6 groups, 3 men, 3 women. So it alternates every other month. So there'll be a month break in between. And we have the Central Wyoming Counseling Center who is doing IOP treatment in there.
And so you're continuing to do that work, and you're also doing some things with the county jail or through the county jail.
Yeah, so this has pretty much been unheard of in our, I can't say state, but I know for the town. Casper, there's a lot of conservatives here, and it's hard for someone that has been convicted of 9 different felonies and been incarcerated as many times as some of us have to be allowed and afforded the opportunity to go back in. And they have just been so gracious in allowing us to go back in and to be able to support these men and women and to really just love them and to express the value that they have.
You touch on something there that I'm glad to hear you say what you said, because I'm still encountering facilities that are saying if you've got a felony conviction in your background, you're not coming in to talk to our population. And frankly, I think that misses the point entirely.
Yeah, I think you should have to have a felony conviction to be able to go in there and talk to them.
Yeah, right. I mean, that lived experience, the work that I do at Second Opportunity, I think that my calling card is lived experience, and the ability to be able to truly relate to somebody that's sitting there and I know the thoughts, the thoughts. There's some pretty dark days where I thought that this is never going to end. Some pretty uncertain days where I had no idea what my life would look like when I got out and how I would deal with the challenges that were ahead of me. And for as much as people may want to help and their intentions are wonderful, but having never felt that, never lived that, never experienced that, they probably can't relate to what those feelings are. And so when you say that, they've welcomed you back in so you could relate to the men and women on the inside, and I think that's so vitally important. I think it's important for those on the inside too, to recognize that people still care about us. People want us to move on with our lives. People want to support us in some form or fashion. And you're there to speak to that. You're there to say, man, when I got out, I could have walked away from incarceration and never looked back. But you want to go back in there to help those in their time of really needing some help.
Yeah, and one of the blessings is that I did 8 years in the Wyoming Department of Corrections. And now this population, opposed to like Florida's population, there's about 25, probably 2,500, 3,000 incarcerated. So the population's very small. And I've been to all 4 facilities throughout those 8 years. And so they know me. They know where I came from. And so regularly, on a daily basis that I go in there, somebody will come to my group that I've ran the streets with or I've done time with. And they're like brothers to me. And so it's almost like a visitation. It's literally like almost being able to go back into the pod that I was incarcerated in and to love on these men and encourage them. And in turn, it does healing in me. It keeps me motivated. It keeps me on the right track.
So you seem to be enthusiastic about the work, happy to be doing the work, and being somebody that regularly goes inside of facilities. I was in one yesterday, but the appreciation, again, I walk out and I feel they help me more than I help them, because the guys that are shaking my hand, and the women that are talking about, that thank you so much for providing this information to us, or whatever it might be. It really enthuses me about what I'm doing, from the standpoint that you're delivering something of value to somebody at a time they really need it. They need somebody to come in and say, you know what, it's not going to be easy, but there is a path going forward for you. And that's, I think, really important, an important message.
And let me help you find it. Let me help you find that, because there's a path for everyone.
So any thoughts about, I just asked a question because it pops into my head. You obviously made a 10-month commitment to be in the welding program, which I'm sure took a lot of effort, and you learned a lot and you sweated a lot to get to that point. Have you had any thoughts about, I just I'll walk away from what I'm doing and get a job back doing some welding or something like that?
Oh yeah, I've went through the last few months. The last 4 months have been a real test for me. I got married after the discipleship program for a year, and things didn't quite work out. So I'm in the middle of a divorce right now. And through that time, I continuously was getting about 10 job offers a day, and from Indeed, all over the country, from 60 to $250,000, sign on bonuses, we'll move you here. And I couldn't do it. I love my brothers and sisters that are incarcerated. And so I took a part-time job with the Natrona Collective Health Trust, which is a trust-based philanthropy. And so they are the grant funders for nonprofit. And so this has been really a huge blessing. I've gotten to learn a lot, and the men and women that I work with are just working so hard. It's a big community effort. And I'm on the Natrona Council for Safety and Justice Committee. And so they started this, and they have all of these different entities, and we're trying to share information and just really go after, homelessness, substance abuse treatment, incarceration, and really just make a difference in our community. Because if nobody does nothing, it will only get worse. There's going to be many, many, many failures. But if no one's doing nothing, then nothing's going to change.
And I think, again, the voice that you bring because of your lived experience to the committee, you're able to take it out of the textbook and say, well, here's how it really is. And here's what that really looks like. And here's what that really feels like. And I know that because I've lived it and I've felt it. And that's invaluable, right? There's many people on committees that in their heart, they want to do the best they possibly can to help those that they want to help. But they really need to hear from somebody that knows what it feels like to be the recipient of that help, and what the struggles are and what the challenges are. And so I'm sure that they appreciate your voice and the things that you can enlighten them about, because they've never lived it, so they really don't understand it.
Yeah, it's been a huge blessing. I never thought that I would be heard. I never thought that my past would be my strength.
Well, that's certainly something we have in common, and sometimes it feels almost unfair that I was just asked to serve on a board, and they were absolutely candid about it. The reason they wanted me on the board is because I had been incarcerated, And I appreciate that. I appreciate that they told me this is what, and they've asked that I make sure that I speak up and let them know what it's really like. This is a national organization that works in, I think they're in about 15% of all jails or prisons around the country. So they have a pretty big presence out there, and they want to make sure that they're hearing how some of the decisions they make in the work that they do will impact those on the inside. And that means they want to hear the truth about what's good and what isn't so good. Not because they're not intending for it to be good. It just, for whatever reason, it doesn't fit. So Caleb, what's next? What's next? You're sitting where you are now. I know you've got some stuff going on, but what's next?
I don't know. I would really like to see the Thrive Together initiative reentry program that we have started. It's all been voluntary. Everybody, we did get our 501c3, but everybody that's been serving and has been voluntary. And I would just like to see that get built up and a resource for the men and women coming out, and that we can help, and encompass a lot of the funding barriers that recently released individuals may run into, helping with getting IDs, driver's license, birth certificates, social security cards, housing, transportation, these things that a lot of people probably take for granted. But when coming out on incarceration, your mind's focused on these things when they should be focused on other things. And so I would really like to see that.
It's so important, right? So absolutely important. And there's so many little things for me that when I got out, I didn't think of that were gonna create, stress and anxiety and problems. But they do. And that's why to have a system in place to deal with those things, that we just have to follow what the system says so that we get our ID, we get our birth certificate, so we're able to apply and get jobs instead of, like when I showed up, the only ID I had was my federal prison ID. And they said, "What's that?" "That's my ID." It doesn't even have an address on there. That's not an ID. It's your picture on a card. And it was a challenge to actually get an ID because I was living in the halfway house. That's not your address. It's where I live. It's not your address. So, those things that we take for granted, maybe I'm just going to go out and get my ID. Sometimes it's not that simple. I'd like to start to wrap up here, and grateful for your time and for your absolute candor and explaining things. But I would like you to take just a couple of minutes and just look into the camera lens and just talk to the men and women on the inside. You've obviously had bumps in the road, being in and out a number of times, and the losses that you encounter with the deaths in your family all bunched together like that at the same time that you were going into a prison sentence, and having your successes after you've gotten out, at least on paper successes, to be able to get an apartment and a vehicle and have money coming in and that type of thing, but recognizing that your purpose is different than that. But just take a minute or two and talk to the men and women on the inside, and maybe bring them some sort of a message of hope and inspiration, that there are things when we get out that can help lead us on the path that we want to be on.
Yeah, I believe that there's, for someone like me, and this is what I tell all the men and women that I speak to in the jail, there's nothing that you have done that can't be overcome. And I believe the being humble and asking for help and allowing others to guide you so that you can find your own path. It's very difficult in an institution setting to be able to come out to the real world and navigate. And there's people out here who truly love you and will help you even when you fall down. We will be there to pick you up. And never give up. Just don't ever give up on yourself. You can give up on everything else, just don't give up on yourself.
Great. Thank you for that. I will say, and I repeat this all the time, that I believe the number one rule of reentry is that we have to be willing to ask for help. And because if we think we're going to get out and do it alone, that's a really lonely path. And there's very few people that have walked that path alone. So if we're not willing to ask and say, I need some help with this, I don't know how to do this, or I've never done this before, to have somebody engaged. The amazing part is that there are many people out there, many organizations out there that are filled with people that will provide that help, that will provide those answers because, like Caleb, have walked down that path. So they know what some of those challenges are. They've experienced them and they've been able to persevere. Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your message. I'm sure that this is going to be a very popular episode. It's just your brutal honesty is amazing. And you and I will continue to build our relationship as we become friends, and we'll continue to do so. But maybe in the future, it would be great to walk down 2 years and bring you back on and talk about some of the other things that you've experienced since we were together.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I thank you for appreciating the honesty. Sometimes people don't want that. And I am who I am.
Let me tell you something. If the worst thing people say about you is that you're honest, I think you're in pretty good shape.
Thanks so much.
This is Augie Ghilarducci with the Path Forward podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Caleb for sharing his story. And I certainly hope that this was something that brought some hope and inspiration into your situation, your life. And we hope you'll join us for the next episode.